we're also in Florida, about to bring you a new case, and we're starting with a hearing. It's the dog park murder case. The defendant in this one is Gerald Radford. He's accused of targeting and killing a gay man at a dog park. The hearing was underway earlier this month while we were covering other trials. This is a compelling case that we're going to watch when it goes to trial. What was interesting is the defendant actually spoke at this hearing, and we learned a lot about the case at this hearing. So before we go into court, let's get you caught up a little bit on the case against Gerald Radford.
As long as you're here, and he comes up to me and screams at me, "You're gonna die, you're gonna die."
That's John Walt Lay on February 1st, 2024, talking about an incident at a Tampa dog park where he was a regular. The next day, Lay was shot and killed at the dog park by another regular by the name of Gerald Radford. Radford would say that Lay attacked him, repeatedly hitting him in the face.
Did your client feel threatened and was carrying the gun that day because of this escalating conflict, or did he take the gun there every time he went to the park?
I'm not going to touch on that at the moment, but what here's the thing. It's perfectly legal to carry a firearm.
But other regulars at the park say Radford had harassed Lay for months, repeatedly using homophobic slurs.
Did you hear him yelling at Walt?
Yes.
What did he say?
Here comes the
He said this in front of the whole group of
in front
folks
of
here.
the whole group, yeah.
One issue that's expected to be debated at trial, how the men were oriented when the fatal shot was fired. Radford claims that he was on the ground with the victim on top of him.
So the gun would be in this, something like this. So you have to be holding it in some manner so that you could reach the trigger. And that would have to be at this angle because it's got to go to the back on the left side.
Chief Medical Examiner Kelly Devers says the fatal shot was fired in a downward direction.
Can we agree that it would be impossible for the person on top to basically be straight up and down their torso and be shot in that position?
It would be very hard if they were sitting like that.
I mean, the guy on the ground
could do it.
Radford is facing a possible life sentence for one count of second-degree murder. Prosecutors are seeking hate crime charges if he's convicted. Yeah, what a fascinating case. Just a couple old guys at a dog park in Florida. One ends up dead after bickering back and forth. Let's go into court. And that medical examiner, this is a stand your ground here. So basically what the defense is trying to do is pave the way for a stand your ground defense. So they have to have this hearing, which is elaborate enough for the judge to make an informed decision. And it gives us a real good look at the evidence. So here's Kelly Devers, that medical examiner, talking about this case and her findings on direct examination.
Did you also observe what is depicted here in State's Exhibit 3I?
Yes.
And what is this?
This is a gunshot wound of the chest. It's an entrance wound.
And I know Judge Ward has heard it a million times, but tell us how you can tell that it's an entrance wound and it's a gunshot wound specifically.
There's a round perforation of the skin, and around the skin there is some blackening, which is consistent with soot. And then there's also what we call stippling, which is burnt and unburnt gunpowder striking the skin and creating little abrasions.
All right, and there's 3J. It's a little focus. You talk about soot and stipplings?
Yes.
Explain what those things are.
These are the soot is the soot that comes from the muzzle of the gun after it's fired, and the stippling is the burnt and unburnt gunpowder particles that are exploding out of the muzzle as the projectile exits.
All right. So there's the actual dark circle. That's the gunshot wound, correct?
That's the hole. That's where the projectile goes in the skin.
What does the fact that you have this stippling or soot around the wound itself? What does that tell you about the positioning of the weapon at the time the bullet is actually ejected from the weapon?
That the weapon is not actually pushing against bare skin, but it is close to the skin.
All right, and so if it's not pushing, but you say close, can you give me some idea of?
Inch or so.
Within an inch or so?
Within an inch or so. I can't be exact, of course.
Now, this picture also appears that beyond the sort of stippling, there's also maybe some reddish. Is that a bruise too?
That's a bruise.
How does the bruise occur?
The bruise can occur from the actual firing of the weapon and the bouncing off of the clothing against the skin, or it can be an object. It could be the actual muzzle of the gun impacting the skin at some point.
But you said that the gun is not actually pressed against the flesh at the...
When the gun is fired.
Right, so it might have been hit to the flesh and then the bullet came out afterwards, or whatever.
That's possible.
Just so we can cover, did you observe the defendant's arms? Here is 3K, the victim's right arm and his right forearm?
Yes.
And we're going to get to the hands in a second, but long story short, did you observe any injuries to the forearm or the upper arm?
No.
I'm going to show a variety of pictures here. This is states 3M, like Michael. Is this the right hand?
Yes.
And then 3N, like Nancy. Is this the same right hand?
Yes.
Did you observe any injuries here to this hand?
Yes.
What did you notice?
There's 2 abrasions on the inside of the right index finger.
Other than, is that basically right here on either side of this sort of bend in the finger?
Yes.
Other than that, here's the rest of the hand. States 3O, states 3P, states 3Q, states 3R. Did you see any of the injuries to the hand?
No.
Now, you saw these hands. This is obviously after the hands have been cleaned up. When the hands first came in, were they dirty?
I think there was some dirt, but I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Okay. Here is States Exhibit 3S and 3T. Is this the left arm of the deceased?
That's correct.
Again, did you observe any injuries here?
No.
This is States 3U, V, W, X, and Y. Are these all the left hand?
Yes.
Now here on the left hand, even though he's been washed, does it still look like at some point there was dirt on this hand?
Yeah, there's dirt in the fingernail areas and under the nail beds.
This is after the body has been cleaned?
Yes.
So it would have actually probably been dirtier.
Probably, yes.
Beyond the dirt that we see on the hand, did you notice any sort of injuries to the hand?
No.
Did you, for example, notice bruising or torn skin, abrasions, cuts, anything that would suggest that the hands had been striking some sort of object, like a wall or another human being?
The knuckles weren't red or swollen.
This is States Exhibit 3Z. What are we looking at here?
There's some, again, abrasions on the left side of the back. The body is face down on the gurney, and the lower back area where there's a redden area below that are the injuries, the little punctate or linear injuries, the abrasions.
Right, sort of starting at the middle of the gentleman's back, his lower back, and kind of radiating to the side. There's sort of a more purple color. What's that?
That's livor mortis.
Okay, and that's not an injury?
No, that's just a natural occurrence after death.
There is, over here, just to the left of the armpit, there is a couple little marks, and then much further, all the way to the left of the picture, there are some darker red marks. Are those actual injuries?
Those are abrasions.
And can you tell me how those injuries are caused, or what the object was that caused them, anything like that?
No, just that it's something that can create a scrape, that's fine enough.
Are these injuries consistent with something a person might sustain during some sort of melee fight kind of situation?
Sure, of course.
Could they get it from rubbing up against an object or rubbing up against the ground or
yes.
whatever?
Okay, again, this is stand your ground hearing in this new case that we are following out of the state of Florida. The medical examiner, Kelly Deaver's on the stand talking about her examination of the evidence, and coming up, she's going to actually show the trajectory of the bullet and demonstrate that for the judge during the stand your ground hearing. It's a big hearing, a lot at stake. Erica Wilson's with us. She's a trial attorney, former criminal defense attorney. Stand your ground in Florida is a big deal if you can get over this initial hump. And it's not as easy. It's not just like, oh, we're claiming it. You got to get a judge to agree that there was, that you had ground to stand on, I guess.
You know, and it's Florida, and so with Florida, this is where we always see these stand your ground type of cases, and typically, unfortunately, the person who is the one on trial ends up getting exonerated. Florida's a very friendly state to either having guns or protecting your own, you know, property or yourself. So I'm not hopeful in this particular situation.
Now, do you think that because, you know, when it's at your house, it's a lot easier to comprehend. So when you're the defense now saying, well, let's just stand your ground. His ground was at the dog park. He has his little area of ground, if you will, and he felt threatened. There was he claims, the defendant, that the other person was on top of him. But is that really stand your ground, or is that just whipping out your gun in a fight?
No, absolutely. I think you have a better defense when you're not at home, because I'm in a park. Where am I going to retreat to? If I'm home, I can go in the house, I can close the door, I can go in my room, I know where the weapons are, I can grab a phone. I have a plethora of options if I'm at home. But if I'm out in the open and I'm exposed and I have nowhere to go and I feel threatened in that particular moment, the only thing that I can do at that point is stand and fight. I don't have anywhere to retreat to, so I think his defense is even better by him being outside and away from his house.
Oh, I love that. Great point. All right, well, let's get a break. We'll go back in. We'll hear the medical examiner kind of knock down this theory that the defense is putting out and the defendant claims as what happened. She's using the technology and the science of where the bullet entered and exited the body to kind of debunk, at least the state is, the assertion that the victim was on top of the defendant when this took place. We'll watch that take place when we return. Also waiting for that press conference to begin in the state of Indiana. There's a live look. We'll get reaction to the Delphi murders. Our Barbara McDonald was in the courtroom today when Richard Allen was sentenced to 130 years in prison. We'll be talking to Barbara as well at the top of next hour. Busy Friday. Stay with us.
How are we doing, guys? We're good? Okay.
You're on very shaky ground.
That is unreal.
People wanted answers, and people started locking their doors.
I did not do it to hurt anybody.
You know what it means. You know what you did, right?
Please hear me out. Please. This was a real-life soap opera. And I said, OJ, everybody thinks you're guilty.
Wow.
Welcome back to TV Live. We're waiting for a news conference to begin in Delphi, Indiana, reacting to the sentence handed down by Judge Gull. Today in Indiana, 130 years for Richard Allen, who was found guilty in those horrific murders many years ago. There's been a gag order, pretty severe one, in this case. So we haven't heard much from the players. It'll be interesting to see if the Indiana State Police, who they were instrumental in this, and they lived this nightmare for so long, along with the families, along with the prosecutors, who's going to speak. But we'll be there. You see the live shot of the podium. As soon as it begins, we'll watch it together. Meanwhile, we're watching a stand your ground hearing in the state of Florida for Gerald Radford. He's accused of second-degree murder for the death of John Walt Lay. The defendant claims he shot the victim in self-defense at a Tampa dog park back in February. Prosecution disputes Radford's story and say the defendant harassed Lay for months, yelling homophobic slurs at him. And the day before the shooting, Lay posted a video on social media saying Radford threatened him at that dog park. Then he ended up dead the next day. Let's go back into court. More direct examination from the medical examiner in this case. Kelly Devers, watch closely as she details how she believes the trajectory of the bullet negates the defense theory that the defendant was on the bottom in this struggle.
Here is State's Exhibit 3AA. And what is this?
This is the projectile that I recovered from his lower back.
All right, and so
right
I'm
near
gonna,
his buttocks area.
And I'm going to go back to State's 3Z. And the time that 3Z is taken, is this gentleman, has his cavity been opened? Has his skin been cut?
No, and you can't really see that area because it's below.
Okay, well, that's what I'm trying to get. In terms of reference, here
Correct.
when we're looking at 3Z, there are these marks to the left of the picture.
Yes.
Actually, the right of the picture. I'm
Left,
so sorry.
yeah.
I keep saying left, but it's right of the
Well,
picture.
it's the right side of the picture.
Right. Yeah. Right side of the picture. Is this area here where the body is then cut open and this brass object is found, is this lower on the body than those marks we see on the right side of 3Z?
Yes, and you can actually see one of the abrasions higher up near the arm.
Is that kind of up here by the finger?
No, not there, but up higher near his armpit
Oh,
area.
yes, up here.
And then I think my hand is over the other abrasions.
I see, okay. Did you withdraw whatever this object is?
Yes.
And what was it?
It was a projectile.
Is that what is depicted here in State's Exhibit 3AB?
Yes.
This appears to be a bullet, basically.
Yes.
Were you able to determine if that bullet that was recovered from, I want to make sure I get this right, is this the left lower back?
Yes.
That bullet that was recovered from the left lower back, is it attached to the wound that is on the right upper part of the body, like near the clavicle?
Yes.
You were able to follow that path?
Yes.
I also want to talk about State's Exhibit 3AC. What are we looking at here?
These are his knees, and we're looking at multiple abrasions on the knees.
All right, and here's State's AD and AE. Are these just close-up photos
Yes.
of those same abrasions?
Yes, they're close-ups.
Can you tell us anything about how these abrasions are caused? What was happening? What caused them? Anything like that?
No.
Is this consistent with a person who might have had their knees exposed, meaning they don't have pants over it? Maybe they're wearing shorts or not wearing pants at all.
Yes.
And their knees come into contact with the ground, for example?
Yes.
Doctor, I want to talk about the trajectory of the wound path. Can you give me a description of it in terms of like front, back, up, down, left, right, whatever the case may be?
Yes.
Okay,
so
tell me about that.
It's front to back, right to left, and sharply downward.
And when you're saying right to left, is that the standard anatomical position?
Correct.
So it's as if I was standing like this, sort of, and you're looking at me.
Yes.
Okay, and so right to left.
Yes.
And how would you describe the angle? Is it would you call it steep?
Steep. Sharply downward.
Sharply downward. And then front to back.
Correct.
Can you tell anything about the positioning of the body at the time he shot? Can you say, oh, he was definitely laying in bed, he was definitely sitting in a car, he was definitely jogging, anything like that?
The only thing I can say is the position of the muzzle of the gun.
And what would you say about the position of the muzzle to the gun?
It had to correspond with that trajectory.
And so I have a prop gun here. Could you demonstrate for her honor the general positioning of the firearm as you would have expected at the moment the firearm would have been discharged?
In some fashion, it would have to be in any of this plane, but it has to be pointing like this to get to the lower back, way down here. So it's got to be a sharp angle, just like this. So you can twirl it around, but it has to be firing in this direction.
All right. And so you can hold
almost perpendicular to your neckline.
Yeah, because it goes right below the collarbone.
Right.
So it's right here, and the bullet has to go through me to my back and all the organs in between.
All right, so doctor, I noticed that you brought a prop with you today.
Yes.
And I have a smaller one if it makes it easier, but I want you to try and help me simulate a variety of scenarios and tell me what you would opine based on that. Or you want me to get this guy or you want my little one?
It's probably more accurate to have something more life-size.
Okay. And Judge, if she could step down, I think it would probably be easier.
All right.
So I will basically just balance this thing or hold it however you like.
Oh, you need this.
Now, if we were standing up at the time of the shooting, and for ease of description, I'll have you be the defendant,
Okay.
the person who is shooting, because you can manipulate the gun.
Okay.
And then this will represent the deceased, the prop here, the demonstrative. Can you tell me how you expect a person would generally be configured if they were discharging this gun into this person, assuming they're roughly the same height?
You mean how would the gun be?
Yes.
So the gun would be in this, something like this. So you'd have to be holding it in some manner so that you could reach the trigger. And that would have to be at this angle because it's got to go to the back on the left side.
And I noticed that you are right-handed, and for purpose of all of this, I want you just to assume that the person who's shooting the gun is right-handed.
Okay.
I noticed that you have, for purposes of the record, you have sort of raised your elbow up almost sort of to like neck height, and then had to take your arm all the way sort of across the center line of your body to accomplish that shot.
Yes.
Is that a fairly odd positioning for a shooting?
It's kind of awkward, but that would be the way it would have to be if I'm holding it.
Okay. Well, what if I was to tell you that instead, you, the shooter, were laying on the ground, roughly with your back against the ground,
Okay.
and then instead this person, the deceased, was somehow on top of you? I want to first, if I can borrow my little one, because it makes it a little easier. He's not going to rest there. Would I be correct if I was to use my pen as to sort of poke through the body here? The shot has to go something like that.
And even steeper because it ends up down here.
Okay, well, I can't make it that steep, but it has to go something like that.
Yes.
So if a person is, for example, kneeling on top of another person, right? So the person's laying on the ground here, and the person, there's another person on top of him. Can we agree that it would be impossible for the person on top to basically be straight up and down their torso and be shot in that position?
It would be very hard if they were sitting like that.
I mean, the guy on the ground
You could do it.
The guy on the ground would have to get his arm all the way
It would
up
have
here.
to be way up here in some fashion and be able to pull the trigger.
Now does it become a bit easier if the person on top starts to lean over more and more and more, thereby closing the distance?
Yes, then it's more reachable.
But even if the person is on the ground, and this person, you still have to be able to establish an angle that steep.
Yeah,
So even if I go sort of maybe 45 degrees.
it's still really hard. I mean, you have to do something like this to do it.
Okay.
And you're just, when you say like this, you're putting your
I mean,
full-
this really awkward position to get it in a fashion.
Now, I want
About
to assume
you're talking about your arm being completely like over your head.
Yeah, to get it so that you can shoot it.
Now, I want you to assume one more fact. I want you to assume that the guy on top, the demonstrative here, has both hands on the gun. Because we could agree that normally the positioning of the deceased is fluid and could be changing.
Right.
And he could, for example, roll his right shoulder forward more or his left shoulder forward more, and that would change potentially his exposure to the guy with the gun.
And he's sitting on me?
Right, still sitting on you. Once the hands are sort of locked in, if the deceased hands are on the gun, and the shooter has obviously at least one hand on the gun to fire the gun,
Right.
is there really a lot of room for the person on top to twist their body to in any way make this an easier shot?
No, because you're kind of locked in with your pelvis, and you can only move so far to the right or the left.
So if I was to suggest to you that the shooter in this case is on the ground, effectively on his back, has the gun in his right hand, has his finger on the trigger, has the person he's shooting on top of him, kneeling on him, at whatever angle, would you still say it's a very hard angle for a person to achieve and to accomplish given the trajectory of this particular wound path?
Yeah, it's still hard to make that happen.
If I was to suggest to you in any way, shape, or form that the deceased also had their finger in the trigger guard, does that make it even harder to accomplish? Like you got to get another finger in here somehow.
Yeah, because there's not much room there.
I'm sorry?
It's hard to get two fingers. But you could,
Doctor, if instead I was to suggest to you one of the two scenarios, one is that, one is that the deceased is somehow in a lower position, maybe even kneeling, and the shooter is at a higher position and is now firing down. Would that be consistent?
that would be easier to do.
And would it be consistent with the wound path?
It
if
would
I
be
was...
consistent with the, because you'd have the angle more easily available.
What if I was to suggest to you this scenario? What if the deceased is effectively back to chest to the shooter, and now the shooter is reaching around and shooting him with the right hand? Would that be a fairly easy position to accomplish?
That's doable.
And that could that be also because the deceased and the shooter are both standing, or, for example, they're both on the ground rolling around?
Sure.
Do those two scenarios, either the shooter being higher than, for example, a kneeling victim, or the shooter being behind the victim and reaching around to shoot him, do those seem easier angles or easier shots to accomplish than this sort of twisting across the center line?
Yes. You can get addicted.